I thought we'd have a little fun with a video about humor and not taking things very serious, being playful, and the idea of being terribly serious. So people have asked me, uh, what is the difference, the fundamental difference between the left and right sides of the brain? And I've come up with different things over the years, but for at least the last year, I've really stuck on this idea that it's the left side of our brain that is terribly serious. And it's the right side of our brain that is far more playful. And that's why it gets involved in humor and just not taking the whole thing very seriously. Now, these two modes of processing seem to reflect the two different types of realities we have as being human beings. And certainly there are times for being serious, and it's interesting in Eastern philosophy, certain practices. I discuss some of these nasal breathing exercises, and in the East they talk about how they will activate the left side of the brain, and that's really good because that gets us ready and to be alert. And that's that sympathetic. In the West, we would call that the sympathetic nervous system, and that's the fight or flight response. And so there's definitely times for being serious. And think about our evolutionary past, when if something's chasing you, it might be a good idea to take that seriously if you're going to avoid being lunch. And then, of course, on the other side, we've got the parasympathetic, and other breathing exercises will activate the right side of the brain, and that is the rest and digest mode. And that's what we find when we do meditation and we do mindfulness, and when we simply relax and stop taking things seriously. So these two modes of taking things seriously and being playful seem to be hardwired into the nervous system. But at the same time, it seems like there's a bit of an imbalance. And so if you've seen so many comedians over the last 5 years or so, won't even play at college campuses any longer. And this is the very reason. They say that the campuses have gotten too serious and they're just not finding things funny anymore. And that may reflect an imbalance. And so if we have these two modes of processing, the trick of the artful way of living would be to find kind of a harmony and integration of the two, rather than just lean too far to one side. And the college campuses, of course, that's where we find this intellectual thinking, and it may not be a coincidence, because when we take a look at our thoughts, they're just thoughts. When we take our thoughts seriously, that is when we seem to get into trouble. That's when we suffer. So if you dig a little into the words, what does being serious even mean? And I've talked about this in a couple other videos. I usually take it to mean something literal, but the word origins it's filled with all kinds of, serious sounding phrases like being heavy, weighty, slow, nothing that sounds like a lot of fun. But that could have been a real survival advantage in the past. And when we take a look at the word, the opposite of being serious and being playful, we find it is synonymous with words like being light and not heavy. And I think it's kind of interesting. And anytime you picture angels, they always have wings, and that kind of reflects their levity and how, their ability to defy gravity. And that's the definition of being light. And I thought that's an interesting kind of symbolism there, because one of my favorite quotes, I've been using this a lot over the last few months, from Alan Watts. And he said, one of the reasons we suffer is because we take seriously what God meant for us to take as humor. And I always thought that's kind of interesting. Maybe, the image of an angel is kind of a pointer to remind us not to take this whole thing so seriously. And I want to play with this a little bit, because when we start to get into humor, there's some interesting relationships between being serious and being playful. And it's in a really interesting way, you actually can be very playful about being serious. I don't know how many of you are fans of Monty Python, but I would guess almost, at least the movies I've seen, it's like all of that comes down to just making fun of being serious. You might remember the one, I forget which movie it was, but it was a drill sergeant who was real serious, and he comes out and he's, yelling at the soldiers, and he's like, anyone have anything better to do than marching up and down the square? And one of the soldiers says, well, I'd quite like to read a book. And the sergeant says, well, go off with you. That's fine. Go read your book. And it's funny. And I think Monty Python made a whole career out of, being very playful about the notion of being serious. Now, you can kind of do the opposite too. In other words, you can become quite serious about being playful. It has a completely different feel to it. And this is what I think when we talk about humor. There's really two sides to it. There's a good-natured sense of humor, and I think that's the first part when we're just making fun of being serious. But then there's the darker side of humor, and that's the mean-spirited version, where we're actually kind of reverse the process, and you see that with the intent to hurt, and it's just not really funny, and it's that kind of making fun of someone in a really nasty way. And I'm going to bring up a couple pieces of interesting research. Maybe I'll put them in the description. Let me know if you want to read them, because the data is kind of conflicting. One research found that people who made fun of themselves had a very high overall sense of well-being. I think that's really important. It's, the notion of making fun of yourself. On the other hand, they found that other research actually indicated that people who were really critical and judgmental and made fun of themselves in kind of a negative way were more anxious and depressed. So it kind of makes sense, because we all get the two sides of humor. The difference when someone's making a joke and there's that lightness to it, versus when someone makes a joke and it feels heavy and serious. And maybe the difference between the two all comes down to that element of seriousness to it. And so what I like to do, I've been making it a practice, and so I invite you to do this. I think it's a worthwhile exercise up there with any spiritual exercise, and that is to just find a good-spirited way to make fun of yourself at least once a day. I think that, and I ended up doing that. I didn't realize how often I did it. But the trick there is to make sure that it has that light feel to it, that it's not serious. And that seems to, it either reflects well-being, or maybe it actually increases well-being, because all the seriousness that gets tied into the self, that is so much the source of so many of our problems, as I say in so many of the other videos. So give it a shot. Let me know if you have some interesting experiences making fun of yourself.